Willie Robertson says his greatest passion is his role as a gospeler, and he shares that every believer is called to be one.
CEO of Duck Commander Willie Robertson may be best known for his role on A&E's Duck Dynasty, but he is most passionate about sharing the good news of Jesus. He says in a world that is desperately searching for the truth, it's a message everyone needs to hear. In his latest book, Gospeler, Willie encourages you to share your faith boldly with the people around you, one conversation at a time.
All right, Willie joins us now. Thanks for being with us. Great to have you.
How you doing? Good to be here.
What are you making up words here? Is this a real word, Gospeler?
It's a real word, believe it or not. It's a real word. My wife found that word. I was writing this book on sharing your faith, and she came in. She said, "Willie, I found this word. It was really old, and it's pretty much a dinosaur word. It's gone out of existence now." And she said it's called Gospeler, and it's someone who simply shares their faith either publicly or personally. And it used to be very common. They were called known gospelers. And so not necessarily pastoral. There was more like just a regular person who was known for sharing their faith and sharing the gospel. And I said, I love that. And I love the idea of bringing something back into culture that used to be commonplace, which is knowing how to do that and trying to bring that back. And so, yeah, it was the perfect word. And then got the tagline of, turning darkness into light, one conversation at a time. That actually came from an ad. I was working on some optics for Duck Commander, another company I have, and we've got this optics that can light up your scope, and it was called Turn Dark to Light. And I said, that's my subtitle for my book. So this title and the subtitle all came from my wife, my business, all that, and which is kind of like our family and kind of like what we've done with a lot of things. So.
Well, this word is very special to you because thank God a gospeler helped save your father, right? I mean, that is a staggering story. Can you tell us just how that encounter happened? He's in his bar, right?
Yeah, kind of the genesis of the book. We had the movie come out last year called The Blind, which really tells that story in pictures and movie form, and did real well, and a great way of sharing the gospel. Because there's other ways of sharing the gospel. It's not you can do it through other ways, and so we can do that through movies and through books and other ways. And yeah, that's the first chapter I started with. And what struck me was had that guy not done that, and so this man travels to he actually goes into the bar that my dad was running,
and he went out of his way. I mean, he drove an hour plus or something.
Yeah. Like, and this is a preacher there in West Monroe, Louisiana, and my dad's sister had begged this guy, like, she was probably the only person that saw that Phil Robertson could be something outside of what everyone else saw him and how he was acting.
How was he acting?
Which was terrible and awful, and he was just out of control. And he had already kicked us out of the house. So the marriage was over, the family was over, everything looked so bleak, it looked like there was no hope. And this guy got in his car, drove to the bar, walked in with his Bible, shared the gospel with Phil Robertson. He didn't immediately respond, he just, I figured he planted a seed and thought, oh, well. And I really go through that in the book, probably like what he was thinking as he was driving back, like, well, that's a day I'll never get back, or I wonder if, because he didn't look like he was going to respond at all, and then he did. So I took that idea and I thought, wow, what if that wouldn't have happened? My entire life would have been completely different, even to this second, when I'm talking to you, like none of this would have happened because there would have been no Duck Commander, no Duck Dynasty, no TV shows, probably no Sadie. I mean, because I don't even know that I would have met, I'd have been raised in a completely different way. And, but Phil did obey the gospel. My mom did forgive him. They kept the family together. And, I'm not one of these guys that goes, and look what God did, like all these blessings. I'm like, if it would have just kept the family together, it would have been worth it, But I believe God had a plan for us, and he goes, so he kept that family together. Phil starts sharing his faith. He became a gospeler. He didn't even know what the word was, but he was known for sharing the gospel. So I saw that, and now as I sit here today and I look back at what had happened, all of what our family's been able to do, you talk about the TV show that ended with a prayer that didn't, not just in America, it went all over the world. So people are inviting this into their home. All the followers, the books, the podcasts, the movies, all the work Sadie does all over the world. hundreds and hundreds of millions of people have been impacted by the gospel. And that's that fruit that comes back. And I can trace that back to that one couple, that one guy going in there.
Amazing.
So I'm appreciative looking back, but I think, what about in the future? Like, who could I talk to that could affect their children and their grandchildren, you know, and turn that darkness into light by having that conversation? So it just really excites me. And I was like, man, we have to have these conversations. I think a lot of people are, you know, they go to a church and they sit there, but they're not having a lot of conversations with other people. So that's why I wrote the book, was saying, hey, you can do this, because I felt like a lot of people that I would talk to just disqualify themselves. They're like, well, I can't, that's not me, that's not my gift, you know, and that's not I don't know the Bible well enough, and I don't know where to start. And I was like, no, you can.
Are those excuses or reasons they feel like they can't be used?
I think they're just, I think they're valid in their minds, I guess. They just, because they just think, well, that's not my, you know, it makes me uncomfortable, therefore I don't want to do it. And so that's the case that I lay out in the book, and I do it through Scripture. We were talking about how much Scripture's in the book, and so it starts with the love of the Scripture, but it's not just ingesting Scripture. I think that's great, but if we're not using that, you know, if we're not using the Scripture to actually go after other people, then I kind of question, like what is it that we're getting? So I make the case, I break it down in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, where Jesus, the last words he says, or some of the last words he says is, you know, go and make disciples, you know, and make disciples, baptize people, teach people. And so, and it was to the disciples. So the question is, was that just for them and those people, or is it for everyone? So I think sometimes we read the Bible and we think, oh, those are super duper Christians that are, you know, these are, you know, we're talking about Peter and John, you know, these are like, but go to Acts chapter 4 and read what their fellow people thought about them. It said they were ordinary and unschooled people, but they took note that they'd been with Jesus. Like, it was obvious that they'd been with Jesus, but they didn't look at them as some scholarly people. They, you know, so when you're talking about ordinary and unschooled people, I think a lot of us feel that way. Yeah. So we're in the same boat, and so I think that challenge is for us. And somewhere I think we got off by not telling people, hey, this is the job. You know, this is what you sign up for, is to go and spread this. I think Jesus gave he gives you the answer when he runs into Zacchaeus and he goes, this is why I came to earth, to seek and save what was lost. So Jesus is telling you his whole game plan was to go after lost people.
You got a fire burning in your heart for the Lord. You did in your youth too, sharing. So one of the most compelling parts of your book was after Duck Dynasty, you know, ended, so to speak. You had a tough time spiritually, right? Yeah. I mean, were you just getting?
Well, probably during,
just the world pulling you toward it, the distractions.
I think so, yeah. And I think, and I wanted to share that. You know, part of me sharing that in the book was when I was struggling and I was, you know, these low parts in my life. I feel like a lot of people, well, we've all been through those times. Yeah. And part of when I share my faith with people, that's usually what I go through with people, is their story. And so, so I ask people about their story. That's oftentimes how I start a conversation. You know, what's your story? You know, do you have a relationship with Jesus? Or, you know, the same as if I'd ask them, hey, are you married? And, you know, and so if I hear problems there, then I'll try to want to have the answers for the hope that I have. And so me sharing that was, it was kind of modeling, that's what I do when I talk to people. So if someone comes to me and says, oh, my marriage is a wreck, or I'm, you know, or I'm sick, or I've got a bad diagnosis, you know, I'm going to get to the gospel.
How did you recover from it for yourself?
Well, it was through, I think the same things that are lined out in the Scripture with what I'm helping people. It's confession of sins, you know. It's like, you got to confess, you got to heal, and you got to move past. You got to have the confidence, knowing that Jesus, that's what he died for. That's what he saved us for. And I pulled that, I likened it to Peter, because I've always been fascinated by Peter denying Jesus, you know. And in my Bible, you see where he denies him. You see where Jesus comes back to him, encourages him. And then once we get to the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1, who's the guy up there in Acts chapter 1? Who's the guy up there that's, you know, replacing Judas? Peter. You know, I mean, literally 2 chapters before, he's denying even knowing him, and now he's up in leadership in Acts chapter 2. Who gets up and preaches the first sermon since Jesus left in a big way? Peter. And so there's Peter again. I thought, wow, how did Peter get that courage to? Because I think in the modern day, like, had we denied knowing who Jesus was in a public way, we'd probably be put in the 10-year box, right, of like, okay, you got to sit out, you know. And what was amazing was Peter got up and did that, and what was the other thing that was amazing, no one challenged him. No one said, hey, who made you the leader of this, you know. And so I gained strength on that, knowing that we don't have to sit on the sidelines and go like, well, I blew it, you know, and so I'm out. And in a lot of ways, I felt like, man, I did fall short, you know, because of it wasn't just that, but it was just, you know, the pressures of life and, you know, all these things that were going on. So I don't think any of us wake up going, you know what, I think I'm going to fall away from the Lord or my calling. I think you look up and, you know, I liken it to a boat, you know, where you're looking, you've gotten way off path, you know, you're like, oh, I got to get back to, you know, back to the mission, back to what I need to do. And despite my mistakes and problems, and that's what I love about Christianity, is there's always hope and there's always a way for people to come back. You know, I don't care where you are, where you've been. And so I think once we can do that, once we get people back on the mission of making disciples and baptizing people and teaching people, you know, the 3 things that Jesus said, I wanted to go back to that and say, this is what I'm here for. You know, we don't know how long we're going to be on this earth, but man, we can really make an impact and share that with others. So.
Last question, I'm going to ask you about your worm farm as a kid because of your entrepreneurial spirit, right, as a businessman. And then also you make an interesting metaphor to how it relates to kind of our spiritual walk and witnessing to people. Tell us about this worm farm you had. What were you, about 9 years old?
Yeah, I was in 4th grade. I remember I was always thinking about business and making money. We were really poor, and so I was always trying to scratch out some money. So yeah, I started Willie's Worm Farm. We lived at what Dad still does. He lives at the dead end right there on the Ouachita River, and so we had a lot of fishermen come through, and I thought, man, I can sell these worms. And so yeah, got the boat, and Dad told me, he said, hey, they like manure, so I was hauling manure. There was a pasture
a long way, right? You were
like a mile away, you know, and had a wheelbarrow. We had nothing that, you know, no kind of machine, and so it was shovels, and and I sold those worms there in the, you know, for a. And so I talk about worms, and I talk about, you know, the fun part was going to get the inventory because I would go out and have to catch all the worms. And so, and I talked about the soil has to be just, you know, either after rain or it's got to be wet. It can't be too wet. And there's one point where the worms just come up and they're right under the leaves. And so, man, and when you start finding them, man, and they're going everywhere. So yeah, I just try to take stories. I felt like Jesus did that as well. You know, Jesus would take a story about something so simple, you know, water and birds and, you know, something you could see, and then he would take that and then, you know, put it into life where we can try to understand that. And the whole book is that. It's just, it's trying to say, hey, you can share your faith. Find the way. I give you some methods of that. The message is always the same, but there's tons of different methods on how people can share, you know, verbally. You can do it online. But just getting the gospel out there.
It's a great book, and there's wonderful accounts in here. Willie loves to baptize people. He's got a real passion for it, and there's some great testimonies in here. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. We'll be back with more of the program right after this. Stay with us.